Okay, we're doing this again. I really do apologize for my setup here. The lighting, the sound, me. I do. I don't get a lot of this stuff, and I try. I'm trying to improve things. Internet, we have issues. I have issues. But I feel like I have a good heart, and I'm putting forth some effort, albeit it's pretty much all me, and that's okay. My son came out with these, and his partner came out with these cool shirts on the back. In fact, I don't think I've shown them to you once. I don't think I can really. Let me try to do this. I apologize again, but the back of this shirt. It's pretty cool. It says "Be not afraid," and then on front here it's just Matthew 14:27. Matthew 14:27. It's really cool. They have all kinds of shirts. Their website is called Bold Testament Apparel. I love that. I'll put a link where you can get a discount. I love anything that pushes the message of Christ. They have Book of Mormon themes and whatnot. Really good quality stuff too. I like it. I like their t-shirts. So they've got the baggy ones, that kids like to wear too, and all that. So I'll put the link, and you can go on their website and see. Yeah, it's cool. It's good stuff. We like to support these small entrepreneurial types that want to do things. I've talked about Larclean, the laundry soap that's from Utah, all natural. We love it. We use it. I won't put the link up on that today, but if you're interested, just put a comment like, yeah, put that link up again. We want to see it. And of course, Cardio Miracle, all that. Okay, so this situation with Karen Hyatt and her excommunication, polygamy denier, all that kind of stuff. I mean, good night. Okay, so here's some interesting thing. This came into my mind in those kind of awake and asleep moments, right? Probably 2, 3, 4 in the morning. I don't know, something like that. And I was awake, but not enough to, really be aware. But that's usually when I get some interesting thoughts. Okay, the other day, Sue and I were talking, and we were on a walk with the dogs, and we started talking about this issue when we heard about Karen. Now, look, I don't know everything about Karen. I have listened to her Woe Unto You Scribes probably 3 times. It's a couple hours long, and I bet I've listened to it 3 times full. I actually have a copy of it in print form. I think it's outstanding research. That's how I feel. Now, just for a little more background, I've never felt Joseph Smith preach or practice polygamy. I always thought that was anti-Mormon stuff. But to be fair and honest, I never really gave it much thought for a long time. This is recent to me. But I've never felt like Joseph Smith preached or practiced polygamy. Now, you might go, well, what about Section 132? How come you didn't? You know what? I don't know. I can't give a good answer to that. I don't know why I never equated and connected all this stuff. For me, it was just, I read Rough Stone Rolling as a stake president. It came out while I was a stake president, I believe, or shortly before. And it kind of went a buzz through our stake in Park City. So I read it, and I hated it. I thought it was the worst book. Nothing personal to Bushman, but I thought, let's take every rumor that we've ever heard about Joseph Smith and put it in print, and then have no backup, to say that it was, truthful or not. So that I just left it on the shelf. I never really thought much about it. But as time goes on, the Joseph Smith papers are really, if you want to blame anybody, blame the church for putting out the Joseph Smith papers, because this is where more and more of this evidence. So it's interesting that we have this label, and Greg Madsen did this, on his latest video on it, which I watched a little bit of it, but I read more of the comments. Polygamy deniers. I don't think anybody's denying that polygamy didn't exist, but polygamy denier for Joseph Smith, that would probably be, a better way to do it. Okay, so the thing that is always said is that if you say that Joseph Smith didn't do it, preach or practice polygamy, that in of itself, you're okay, but then you're really not. Because if you say they didn't, or he didn't do it, then how did Brigham Young get it going? And then you automatically throw him and the subsequent prophets. Now, this is an interesting thing how it works, because Greg Madsen said all the way up to Joseph F. Smith practiced polygamy as a prophet, which really I don't think is, I guess it's true in a sense, but Wilford Woodruff is when the manifesto came, 1890. And there were some marriages after that by apostles. John Taylor's son, I think, did some, and he got in trouble for it. And there were a few, but by and large, it was done away with. Done away with. And I want to talk a little bit about that. And so, really, after that, they still lived in polygamous families, because you don't just leave your wives just because polygamy, but there's no new plural marriages for the most part. Let's not get into the exceptions, right? We know there were, but for the most part, they're done away with. Well, here's an interesting thing. Where were most of these polygamous sealing and marriages performed? Most of them were done in the Endowment House that was on Temple Square. A beautiful building. I think the builder architect was the same one who was doing the Salt Lake Temple. Brigham Young asked him to do that. Hang on a second. My studio. The Endowment House, where these sealings, marriages, plural marriage could be performed. Well, we might have a little bit of a key in the Old Testament of some of the things that are going on. We can read and study about the town, the area called Bethel, or Bethel, house of God. So many events happened here. So many events. This is where Jacob had his dream. Joshua was there. Back to Abraham was in Bethel. It's not that far north of Jerusalem. I've been there. You can see, there's a shrine built over, the area where Jacob supposedly had his dream. There's some bedrock there and a rock. I'm not saying that that's the exact spot, but I am saying that it's the area, it's the place. But there was also a shrine and an altar to false gods, and that's where the altars were broke down and the horns broke off. So this is an interesting concept of when things happen that are not right in God's eyes, they need to be destroyed and taken down. Okay? So what happened to the Endowment House? What happened to the Endowment House? It was, it's interesting that we use the word raised when something is leveled. Might be a different kind of raised, but it was raised. It was leveled in 1889, months before the manifesto came out. So there was already, Wilford Woodruff had already received direction from the Lord to stop polygamy. And he was getting pressure from the U.S. government, for sure. But if you do a quick Google search or a AI search on this, you'll see that in addition to, if not the main reason, was to send a message to the saints that polygamy was no longer going to take place. New marriages, I shouldn't say polygamy wasn't going to pay, new polygamous marriages were not going to take place anymore. The existing ones, you kind of have to deal with that. It's not like you can just, boom, okay, I only have one wife now. See you later, other 20 plus, whatever. Good luck. You can't do that. So it continued. Polygamy continued, obviously, but the new polygamous marriages, the message that Wilford Woodruff even said was to the saints, it stopped. And so what did they do? They leveled the endowment house. It's gone. Disappears. Like destroying an altar that has had abominations taking place on it. So I think this is very, very significant. Now, what was the other place where polygamous marriages were performed? Nauvoo, the Nauvoo temple. All of them after Joseph was killed. Now, for sure, the temple wasn't finished or completed. The baptismal font was there, and baptisms for the dead were done while Joseph Smith was alive. Baptisms for the dead. But polygamist marriages were not performed until Joseph was dead. And that was done. So what happened to the Nauvoo temple? And why were the saints driven? A lot of it was because of their disobedience, in my opinion. It's the same pattern as the children of Israel. As they become corrupt, they get scattered, driven, moved out. Now look, because that happens, that does not disqualify. Okay, this is where I love. This is why I'll never probably get too many followers, because I'm equally offensive on both sides. I've always maintained that Brigham did not lose the ability to be the leader of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the kingdom of God on earth. He was the prophet. He was the president. He was the man. So the Brighamite branch was the branch of the Latter-day Restoration, continued from Joseph Smith. I believe that. I firmly believe that. But that doesn't mean that there weren't some strange things that happened and that needed to be fixed by God. We have a whole list of them. We've talked about it. The banning a whole race of people from entering a temple, going to the temple, receiving their endowment, and men receiving the priesthood. That had to be fixed. And that was taught as doctrine. Scriptures were used. Come on. I was raised with that, so I'm old enough to know. You can't tell me that it was just policy forever and ever. I've shared documents where Joseph F. Smith, when he was prophet, a first presidency message said this revelation came from God. Okay, but we don't teach that anymore. So, it's more of a testimony to me that is a living church that is allowed, leaders are allowed to have agency, but eventually the Lord fixes it. He fixes it, and he fixed polygamy. It's like, if you practice polygamy now, you'll be out faster than if you say Joseph Smith wasn't a polygamist. So it's such a dichotomy. It's so strange, that we're defending polygamy, and yet if you practice it, you're out. So the Lord used Brigham for bringing the saints to the promised land, to Zion, to the New Jerusalem, and establish the saints where they could get a foothold. Now, personally, I don't see any justification in Scripture for plural marriage. It was never commanded by God. I know Section 132 says that God gave David, his wives and concubines, other than Bathsheba with Uriah, her husband. But other than that situation, they were all given to him, and that God gave Abraham Hagar, which isn't. Biblically, that's not true, and Joseph Smith didn't change that. He didn't change that in the inspired version. It's the same. That it was Sarah that gave her handmaid, her assistant, to Abraham to bear children because she couldn't have them, and it caused a lot of trouble. But the Lord used it. He used these situations to continue. So I don't go the route that some do, and I don't even know what Karen says about Brigham Young. I don't think he was disqualified, but I think he made some major decisions that were contrary to the will of God, and that it had to be fixed. And one of the big signs was the destruction, total leveling, done by prophet, seer, and revelator Wilford Woodruff. Flattened, done away with, to send a message to the saint: we are not participating in this anymore. That's big. And then what happened to the Nauvoo temple? Well, it was sold, and historical records say that it was an unknown arson who set it on fire. Now, it was built out of limestone, the outer structure, but everything's supported inside with wood, and it burns, right? And so it does become pretty much just a shell of a place. But then a tornado, and if you Google this tornado, it was significant, and probably one of the most significant tornadoes that have happened. And I think it was in 1850, as I recall, and it destroyed it. There was one wall remaining, and it was so unsteady they just it just knocked down. So what did the Lord do to these places that were used for plural marriages? He destroyed them. One with natural, maybe arson, but maybe just a fire. Maybe God brought fire down. I don't know. They don't really know. They just assume it's arson. But definitely a tornado is nature, right? And God controls that. And that came, boom. Now, the other interesting thing is the endowment house was done just by Wilford getting the command to do this. And he says, if we don't stop polygamy, we don't have a church. It's gone. How did the children of Israel get punished usually for their disobedience? Hello, anybody there? We have the Assyrians. The northern kingdom was so corrupt, the drunkards of Ephraim, right, and polluting sacred sites. They were worshiping false, disgusting gods, scattered by the Assyrians. Okay, the southern kingdom scattered by the Babylonians, King Nebuchadnezzar, wiping out, destroying the temple, not completely, but destroying it to some degree. And then the Persians overtake the Babylonians, and King Cyrus allows many of the Jews to return back. And that's when you get Nehemiah and Ezra, and they rebuild the temple, and things start happening again. The blessing of Israel and King Josiah. You have certain kings that do good. Certainly Hezekiah, good king, and things are brought back. Well, actually, I'm sorry. Hezekiah was earlier. He was during the time of Isaiah, during the northern kingdom conquest. So I apologize for that. But you have some good things happening, and then you have the rebuilding under a wicked king, Herod, and just this massive improvement, and basically leaving the old temple, building a new temple over it to satisfy the Jews there, that the old temple is still preserved, but building a new one over it, and then expanding the Temple Mount. And this is, then we come to the time of Christ. And then Christ predicts the total, like, see all these buildings on the Temple Mount? There's not going to be one stone left upon each other of these buildings. It's going to be leveled. And that's exactly what the Romans did, destroyed. So the Lord used these other countries, their military, their governments, their armies, to lay waste to a rebellious and corrupt Israel, his covenant people. Scatters them. So isn't that interesting that's kind of what happened to the Mormons, the early church, right? Our church is that, typically we'll go, well, Hans Mill, they weren't obedient, and that's why they got destroyed. Or they weren't allowed to build the temple in Jackson County because they were disobedient. Well, ultimately, in my opinion, the big disobedience was this polygamy issue. It really caused a lot of issues. The Nauvoo expositor accusing Joseph of practicing polygamy, Joseph destroys it because he says it's a bunch of lies. William Law accuses Joseph of being a polygamist. Apostate. So these things are just going. You have this idea of sealings, which, the narrative now is that, well, Joseph Smith didn't quite understand what the sealing was. So they did these adopted sealings where he would be sealed to women, men, families, because they didn't have ancestors that were baptized, right? And so someone that is baptized can be sealed, that you can be sealed to them to get your connection of the sealing to the family of God. So this was more of a sealing to the family of God. That got morphed into plural marriage. But it is interesting that most of these marriages were done after Joseph died. And I think the evidence is so strong that Joseph wasn't part of this and denied it so many times. And it was in the Doctrine and Covenants in section 101. It's pretty compelling. And that wasn't added until right before Brigham Young died, where section 132 was added to the Doctrine and Covenants. I think it was 1876, I believe. It was announced, I believe, in 1853 by Parley P. Pratt, perhaps, in conference, the section 103, and then taught, but it wasn't actually added to the Doctrine and Covenants until 1876. And then the old section 101 was removed, which was marriage between one man, one woman, monogamy. Now, so we have this. But now I know what you're thinking. You're going, well, what about the Manti Temple? What about the Logan Temple? And what about the St. George Temple? There were polygamous marriages performed there, and they weren't destroyed. Great question, and I think that's a valid defense if you want to disagree with me on it. My answer to that is these are satellite temples to the mothership, the Salt Lake Temple. They're satellite temples. And it's interesting that President Kimball, who fixed the priesthood ban and temple ban, was the prophet that rededicated, I think, 2, if not 3 of these temples, which is interesting. But these temples have been rededicated. But here's the kicker. The Salt Lake Temple wasn't dedicated until after polygamy was done away with. And now I know there's some other stories about the foundation stones of the temple. Remember, they used sandstone and they covered them up. Johnson's army came. They had to postpone the building of the temple, and then they looked at those stones and uncovered them, and they saw deterioration. Some say this is a legit. Some say it's not. But in any event, it stopped the progress of building the temple for a few years. Well, those few years were added on, which made it so polygamy, there haven't been one polygamous marriage performed in the Salt Lake Temple. Now you could say, well, President Nelson, President Oaks, they've been sealed to other women, but I'm talking about plural marriages where they're both alive. One man and multiple women being married to him while they're simultaneously all alive, right? That never happened in the Salt Lake Temple. And because of that, it protected the other temples, the satellite temples. That's the mothership. It's the mothership. Now, Salt Lake is a unique place. It is in the mountains. It's in the mountains. Mountains surround it. You have a Dead Sea, you have a river, and you have a freshwater sea, in a sense. And the mirror image of Jerusalem. And even Salt Lake City is in a similar position to where Jerusalem is, to the Sea of Galilee, the River Jordan, or the Jordan River, and then flowing into the Dead Sea. So it's like God saying, look, you're going to go here. This is what you're going to do. This is how things are going to be. And I know it, and I'm going to work through it. And now we've talked about this before, but you'll say, well, but how could this happen when so much good came out of plural marriage? You have all these kids, you have all these families. My great, think of this. I came from polygamous background. My dad lived to mid-90s. He died a few years ago. So he was born in 1927. Now, if you took a guy, say he was 30, I'm just doing this off the top of my head, say he's 30 in 1890. He's 30, and he has multiple wives. Okay? Fast forward to the 20s. So from 1890 to the 20s, he's going to be in his 60s and still plural marriage. And then if you add another 10 years on that, he's going to be old guy, but he might have 2 or 3 wives still with him. My dad, as a 10-year-old or 12-year-old, could have easily known those people. We're not that far removed. And then I knew my dad for, 60 years. So we're still connected. That's why this is such a hot topic. People don't, if you come from pioneer stock, which I do, it's still part of it. You can actually see why some people fall into forbidden territory, let's just say, because their grandfather was polygamous, who they knew, kind of thing, depending on how old you are. So we're still, and so wandering eyes could be kind of part of the family tradition, right? Like, hey, I know I'm married, but my grandpa was married to more than one woman, maybe. I'm not saying that you consciously think that, but that could be somewhat in your DNA, not in your DNA, but in your tradition, family tradition. And so I can see how these things would affect somebody in their thinking, not excusing it, but just realizing. So when it's still that fresh in our culture, we're going to have these things. We're going to have situations where we're just like, these are fighting words. I'm gonna clench my fists and I'm gonna fight. So I get that. But looking from a higher or a different angle, looking at the Old Testament and how shrines and places were destroyed and altars were destroyed, I look at the Nauvoo Temple and I look at the Endowment House as being leveled, destroyed, razed, and that is a signal and a sign from God, in my opinion, that is done away with and it is over. Now, just to add on to that, I think the proclamation The Family, A Proclamation to the World. Read it carefully, and you'll see that there's a huge separation from this idea of plural marriage. Also, even the essays that are in question by polygamy deniers, they say that polygamy is the exception and the norm is monogamy. Now, that's both eternally and on this earth, right? So that is way different than what Section 132 teaches. So even in our own traditions and doctrine and things that were taught, that has changed dramatically from this is the new and everlasting covenant. Polygamy is. And if you read Section 132 very carefully and all the verses, because it's really done kind of chiasmically, because you start with polygamy, you have this intermediate, and then it ends with polygamy. If you want 10 virgins, you got them, kind of thing. And at the end. So the churches, even in the essays, are stepping away from that. And it's more of, well, it's to raise a righteous generation, not that it's an eternal principle that's going to be lived someday. So older people, I would say 70 and above, a lot of them would still have in their mind that this is coming back. Polygamy is coming back. And it'll be during the millennium, or it's going to come back sooner, and we better be ready for it. And even younger people, but I'm just saying older people, that was taught, kind of like we're going back to Jackson County kind of thing, or we have to go back there, to go to establish Zion. And I would say the polygamy thing is along those lines. That's not taught anymore. It's not taught in the essays. So that has changed. It continues to change and distance. And I've already expressed and told you our experience in our mission when we have converts from polygamous groups. Oh my goodness, they're put through the ringer. And the question of the temple recommend question, which I mentioned, do you support or agree or affiliate with any groups or individuals whose teaching and practices are contrary to or opposed to those accepted by the church? That mostly had to do with polygamy. Are you part of a polygamous group? Because they still wanted to access the temple, and so they found that these things were happening. Anyway, so bottom line, I don't think there was any interruption between Joseph and President Oaks. No interruption. But things get fixed. And to deny that, or to say that it's consistent and it's always been this way and it's never changed, that's just not true. That's just not true. The new information from the Joseph Smith papers sheds a huge amount of light on Joseph Smith. There's no proof of him having any offspring. There's no proof of him having sexual relations with anyone other than Emma. That's big. I would say that's big. You can't say that about Brigham, can you? You can't say that about Brigham. You can't say that about Brigham. So no proof with Joseph. Let's just do that. Let's just do that. And then the Lord fixes things, but also works with people. Now, you can say, well, all this good that came out, and I'll wrap up with this, that came out of polygamy, how would the Lord allow that? Or why, if it wasn't a good thing, why would he allow that? Well, why would he allow David to have his fling with Bathsheba, put Uriah in a position to be killed? Who was their offspring? The first child died. Second child was Solomon. Christ comes through that lineage. So would we say, that was really good? Way to go. Way to go, God, putting that situation together so we could have Solomon, who became, corrupt, right? He did. But that's the lineage of Christ. That was good. Not that happened, but something good, something perfect came out of that. Something perfect came out of David. And we've gone through this before. We've talked about about Boaz and Ruth, Boaz and Ruth. Again, Christ's lineage. She's a Moabite. You know where that lineage came from, right? The incestuous relationship between Lot and his daughter. Good things can happen. Rahab, Tamar. All this is in Christ's background. So you can't, and he's the ultimate in goodness, perfect. You can't justify those decisions and life things because something good came out of it. So same with polygamy. You can't say, well, it has to be from God because look, I came from it and look how good I am. You can't do that. So I'm hoping to have Karen on. I don't know how things will work. I've had some communication with her before in the past. I think she's awesome. I don't know everything about, what she teaches or what I love. And I think everyone ought to listen to Woe Unto Ye Scribes. I think it's fantastic. I think it's been well researched and it's good. Now, I totally disagree with Greg Madsen and Brian Hales on this idea that because you don't believe Joseph preached or practiced polygamy, you automatically throw all the rest of the prophets that practiced polygamy under the bus. You know how things happen. It happens in our families. It happens in our life. When something is done by somebody that you love and respect and you sustain, you're going to do it, and it's going to happen, and it's going to happen, and then finally things change. We see this repeatedly through the Old Testament. We see it. Things have to be fixed, and to me, it's a testament of agency. The Lord allows this to happen because He allows agency, but eventually He has to fix things, and sometimes He uses, not always, I don't think, but in the Book of Mormon, we have the Lord uses the wicked to punish the wicked. We have this. We have this in the Old Testament. And I think that, corrupt governments and whatnot, put their pressure on the saints, especially in Utah, but all along the way, you could talk about, Governor Boggs, you could talk about national leaders. We could even talk about the persecution of BYU and the election committee for the playoffs, right? In football, you could talk about persecution all day long. Bottom line is that much of persecution is brought on by disobedience, and when we're obedient, it doesn't mean we won't be persecuted, but it's going to be clear that the persecution isn't justified, and that it's not because of your disobedience. It's for a different reason. But then when you look at it from another way, you could totally identify the children of Israel were destroyed because of their disobedience, and if they would have been obedient, God would have had their back and protected them. So we can see these situations. Now, Christ, obviously, and the early apostles, they weren't disobedient, and they suffered major persecution. And Christ prophesied to him. He said, "You're gonna go through worse things than I did." As far like he had to endure, the garden and the cross, right? Which nobody can imagine. But that was for a short period of time relative. And I think what Christ was saying to his apostles is this is your rest of your life now. This is the rest of your life. So we do have those situations where people are persecuted that don't deserve it, but they're doing it as a testament against somebody. Like we have those in the Book of Mormon, right? With the children of Ammon, people of Ammon, and others who were righteous, repented, and were destroyed, were killed. Not because they were wicked, but because it was a testament against those who were doing it, and God had to allow that to happen for His purposes. So I think that's it. I think that's all I wanted to talk about on this video. I'll leave the link for these shirts. You'll love them. They're just awesome. And stay in the good ship Zion. I don't recommend excommunication for anybody. I think it's not the route to go. But sustaining, not always agreeing. Sustaining and agreeing are two different things. And this picking up one end of the stick, you pick up the other, is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And I think Brian Hale's really his research and his conclusions are really weak, in my opinion, really weak. And I've listened to a lot of his stuff. I haven't read any of his books, I'll be honest, but I've listened to a lot of his podcasts or his being a guest on someone else's. And I think there's a lot of great evidence out there that Joseph is the prophet of the restoration and didn't participate in ungodly things as marrying and having sex with multiple women, and many of them teenagers. I don't believe that. Brian Hales does. 16, 17-year-olds, like a half a dozen, he says. He said there's not really good evidence for the 14-year-old, although he married her. I was like, yeah, whatever, dude. Okay, love y'all. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.